That's a little reimagining of the Star Trek Deep Space Nine theme. How is everybody? It's me and Peter back for more
New.
Star Trek Deep Space Nine talk. What's up, brother?
Not much, not much. Finished season one today, actually.
Oh, there you go. We're moving ahead. Yeah, I still have not finished season two. I have to watch that last episode of season two. But I want to thank everybody who came on and listened to the last broadcast and left comments and on the Facebook pages and wherever you left those comments. Thank you very much. Don't forget to like and subscribe, guys, because it's tough to post these videos in all the Star Trek pages that I have and figuring out which ones let me post, which ones don't let me post. So I can't always get around to that, but I do thank everybody who is joining us on this journey through Star Trek Deep Space Nine. And I do want to say also uh, that I was a little nervous last time. So I made a few mistakes here that I want to correct. And first is that Rick Berman and Michael Piller are the creators of Star Trek Deep Space Nine. I had mentioned that it was Braga. And also, someone mentioned that on the slide I had put Active Pursuit as one of the episodes when it's actually Captive Pursuit. So, thanks for catching that. And, guys, oh, it's tough to keep up with all the plot lines and all the names and all that stuff especially with Star Trek Deep Space Nine, and especially the further we get into it. So, forgive any mistakes that we make along the way. But anyway, Pete, tonight's episodes are very much related. And by the way, you heard a remix there. And I always do this, Pete. I get the remix, I have it open, and then what do? I close the page that I opened it from. So wait, while Pete is talking here, I'll look it up and I'll give that page some credit because it's kind of a cool little remix. But tonight we're going to be talking episodes 6 through 10 of season 1, which is going to be Q-less, Dax, the passenger, Move Along Home, and the Negus. So, what do you think, Pete? For me, these episodes were like, what happens when people visit the space station, because there was a lot of visitors to the space station in these last few episodes here. What do you think of this batch?
Yeah, not really my favorite batch for sure. It seemed like what they were doing after the pilot is they were trying to give each of the characters like their own development episode. Like we had the ones we did last week where we had the bit with Kira and her old revolutionary buddy, and then we had Odo and his murder mystery. This week we'll be looking at a very Dax centered episode and a very Bashir centered episode. Um, but I think these episodes definitely focus a little too much on the visitors and not really enough on what it seemed like they were trying to do, which is establish these characters.
Yeah, I tend to agree with it. This is probably the weakest batch. Just thinking off the top of my head from season one, and it's the stuff that for me as a first-time viewer was a little tough to get through because it also feels like the most B scripts that maybe weren't accepted for TNG. Like, hey, we can reuse this. And for Deep Space Nine, it's the little batch that feels the most like this too. Um, but they were trying stuff. By the way, guys, it's Disco Dragon FTW here that did this remix. So there you go. Go support this brother's page there. So for me, could have been better. Could have been better. Some of these episodes, but they more or less work. The first one we're going to look at, folks, is Q-less. So again, like I just said, a lot of these episodes feel like they're taking what worked on TNG or maybe some rejected scripts and they're like redoing them. And this features Q, our favorite little trickster, space trickster, who is in a new season of Star Trek Picard.
Hmm.
And as soon as that season's over, I'll give a little blurb about how I felt about it. But it aired on February 8th, 1993. Teleplay by Robert Hewitt Wolf. Story by Hannah Louise Shearer. And it's directed by Paul Lynch. And the runabout crew finds Q's former traveling companion Vash, played by Jennifer Hendrick, in the Gamma Quadrant, and Q comes to the station in an attempt to convince her to rejoin him. So, what do you think of this Q episode?
I thought it was both disappointing and unnecessary. I think it was pretty much a blatant attempt just to win over fans from Next Generation who weren't watching Deep Space Nine yet. Like, hey, we got Q. But I mean, okay, Q's a cool character. If you do something with him that's interesting, it can work. But he wasn't really very Q-y here. He was just basically chasing Vash around like a lovesick puppy, which really didn't seem very much like Q. I think Q's kind of above that sort of thing. I mean, the basic premise is that they've been traveling around the Gamma Quadrant for a few years, and she's sick of his shit, so she's leaving him, and he's trying to convince her to stay. And there's all this weird shit going on in the station. It's having these power drains, equipment malfunctions, and you, the audience, will figure out long before the crew of Deep Space Nine does. It has to do with these artifacts that Vash has brought on board the station and is trying to auction off. So you got Cisco going around trying because he gets the lowdown on Q from O'Brien, and he's going around trying to figure out what's Q's angle, what's he up to, how is he responsible for this. We get some cool interaction between Cisco and Q. I like that because it kind of contrasted the difference between the dynamic that Q had with Picard and the dynamic that he has with Cisco, just a completely different character. But, ultimately, Q is just there trying to get his girlfriend back, and we figure that out pretty quickly. Like, it's obviously the artifact. So yeah, kind of a flagrant grab to win over next generation fans. Not really the Q that we want to see. We want to see Q in either like really wacky comedy episodes or like super epic fate of the universe type episodes, and this wasn't really much of that.
I agree with you 100%. I remember when I first watched this, and I was really excited because I was like, "Oh, I didn't know Q was on Deep Space Nine," and then I'm looking forward because I really like Q. I know there's a lot of Q haters out there in the Star Trek community. There's a lot of people that can't stand his character, but I love him. And so I was looking forward to it, and I said, he doesn't do anything very Q-ish, which it's fine if it serves the plot a little bit. Like I know there's one episode of Star Trek Deep Space Nine, which is sorry, Star Trek TNG, which is very very good, where he loses his powers and he's a human, and that's part of the interesting aspect of the episode and how he's dealing with being a human as a punishment. Or there's one on Star Trek Voyager where a Q wants to commit suicide, and Q shows up and he gives his side of the issue and things like that. So he doesn't have to be like doing all the trickster type stuff all the time for the character to be interesting, but he should at least be doing something. And he played a really secondary role in this episode. When he finally tried to get into Cisco's head, Cisco just punched him out, which that is epic though.
Yeah,
But it's Cisco that's epic, he punches Q out. But other than that, I said exactly what you said in my notes. It's a pretty boring episode because we all know that the gem is the issue if we watch The Emissary. Uh, um, and then this secondary plot about which isn't really a secondary plot. It's like, all the system failure and everything. It's pretty clear for us what it is. And for the crew of Deep Space Nine, they think that it's Q, but it's not. But it's not much of a mystery to the viewer, so it's kind of a boring episode. One highlight from it is, well, other than Cisco just punching him out, is Bashir at the beginning telling his epic story of his Starfleet medical final, where he came in second place and O'Brien's not impressed. The only reason I like that is because Bashir and O'Brien become like it's like the bromance of the century. They become really good friends. But it's so funny how opposites they are and how much O'Brien just cannot stand this guy, much like everybody else on the station for the first couple seasons, because he's just a horn dog. But yeah, 2.5 stars for me, guys. Not the most exciting Star Trek Deep Space Nine episode or intriguing one. So we're just gonna move right ahead to the episode called Dax. Okay, and in this episode, which premiered on February 15th of 1993, written by, or sorry, story by Peter Allen Fields, but the teleplay is by DC Fontana, Star Trek alum, iconic Star Trek alum, and Peter Allen Fields, and directed by David Carson. And Dax is charged with the murder of a military hero from a non Federation world that her symbiote's previous host, Curzon, allegedly committed 30 years ago. And by the way, I am reading from Jammer reviews. If anyone out there doesn't know about Jammer's reviews, check his page out. I'm actually even going to share the screen because he has the best reviews of these episodes and summaries and stuff. It was much easier to navigate than the wiki page. The wiki page is insane. It's like way too much stuff. Um, so this episode I liked a little bit more, but I still, Pete, give it that trying to be the next generation type episode, because there's a classic Star Trek The Next Generation episode called The Measure of a Man from, I think, season two, where this doctor, actually it ties into Picard season one, because I think it's the same scientist from Starfleet who wants to disassemble data, because he's just an android, so we can study him and we can see if we can use this technology to make more androids. And that comes, and then it creates this ethical issue of, is data a sentient being? Is he allowed to have the choice to not want to be taken apart and studied like you would an old automobile or something? And it's a classic episode where Picard has to serve as his lawyer, so it's a courtroom episode. Riker has to be the prosecution, etc., etc. And this episode kind of plays those same beats. It asks a really good question, which
Mm-hmm.
is Dax responsible for something that her form or the symbiote's former host did? But where I think it misses the mark, is that it doesn't really dig into that. Well, as soon as it's getting heated and we're starting to get into this question of, is or isn't she responsible? It all kind of ends in this very melodramatic, I know who really did it type thing. I'm not going to spoil it, but it gets very soap opera-y at the end as far
Mm-hmm.
as who's really responsible for the murder. And I don't think it's a spoiler that it isn't Jadzia Dax or even
Right.
her former host, the symbiote's former host, Curzon. But yeah, the ethical question was there, and Star Trek is usually at its best when it asks these questions. I mean, to this day, people debate Tuvok's from Star Trek Voyager. Uh, there's a teleport accident, and two of the crew members become one. And now the captain has this issue. Should I kill this person essentially so that they can return back to the two other people? Or is this a new life that I need to keep alive and the other two are technically dead? And people will debate this forever in the Star Trek groups. And it's a good question. Sometimes the answer is not simple, but I think this one avoided even not giving us the simple answer, by not saying yes, no. maybe. That's how I feel about it.
Yeah. Sorry.
Uh-oh. By the way, for those hearing Pete cough out a lung, he got a little sick with, we had carnival here last weekend, and
Yeah. Yeah.
so
No, I think I might have COVID again. Actually, I seem to get it like every other month, but that's
yes.
fine. I'm all dosed up. At any rate, yeah. So, like I said at the start of the show, they seem to be trying to give at the beginning each character their own little showcase episode. So this was the Dax episode. It was kind of good in that respect. It gave some background on um, the symbiote's previous life and previous hosts, because all we really knew about him is that he was an old guy and he was like a mentor to Cisco. So we get a little backstory on Curzon Dax. We do have this ethical issue. We also learn that like she's stuck with this slug forever because they mentioned that, well, one possible solution would be just to take the slug out of her and put the slug on trial, but they make it pretty clear that neither of them would survive that procedure. We get Bashir like mooning over her like a lovesick puppy in the opening sequence there. It's like, dude, you're pathetic, man. Like she's so out of your league. But yeah, where it fails isn't so much for me that they abandoned the moral storyline. It's that it was, first of all, it was so obvious that no version of Dax was responsible, but it was also obvious that she was covering for someone because she just
Mm.
keeps her mouth shut for the whole thing. Like she's way too chill. It's like, she's protecting someone, and that's clear really early on. But then, like by the midway point, you know who she's protecting, and you pretty much, again, it's one of those things where you figure it out long before anyone on the space station does. So it had promise. It was good character development for Dax, but ultimately it was kind of a letdown.
I agree, and it's for those reasons too. I just watched an episode a couple days ago from season 2 that has a similar twist where the person that's said to be guilty of a crime is actually covering for someone, but the surprise is much better. It's kept, the twist at the end is revealed much better. But in this one, it's like so clear because, like you said, her silence, and she's a very talkative character, and her willingness to just be, yeah, 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 put me through this, and if I have to die, I'll have to die. If I, you know, and that's not Dax's character. She's a warrior in a way. She's a fighter. So she was covering up, and then when Cisco goes and meets a certain somebody, it's like, oh, obviously there's more to this story than meets the eye. So I give it 3 stars. It's like it's not a bad episode. It just doesn't have the impact, like I said, of Measure of a Man is just a classic episode. That's one of the best, regardless of Star Trek or any other TV show. And someone here on the Jammer page had also mentioned the Drumhead and Arthur, which are in Rules of Engagement, are also other really good courtroom episodes that work a little bit better than this one. So that's it. We're moving quick here through these episodes, but there's not much more to say about that. Oh, other than, come on, man, Bashir is really bad at like trying to save people, because they go into the ship, they capture Dax, they do all this stuff, and it's like, good lord, you know. And there seems to be this thing with Star Trek Deep Space Nine, which I find funny, is the sensors for phasers seem to only go off when the plot needs them to go off, or like the
Right.
sensor, some type of attack on the ship. Um, and then when they don't need them to go off, okay, then yeah, we don't need the sensors. Now we got another episode here called The Passenger, which premiered on February 22nd, 1993. Story by Morgan Gendel. Teleplay by Morgan Gendel. I think that's how you pronounce it, or Gendel. And Robert Hewitt Wolf and Michael Piller. Okay, so we got some heavy hitter guys there. And directed by Paul Lynch. And it's a plot based mystery. Bashir attempts to resuscitate the critically injured criminal Vantika, but the man dies. And Kajada, the security officer escorting the convicted killer to prison, however, is convinced that Vantika's consciousness still exists and may be plotting to hijack a supply of deridium en route to the station.
Yeah. Well, that's pretty much it. You said it. It's a it's not much of a mystery actually, because obviously you wouldn't have an episode without it. All this happens in like the first 5 minutes. Basically, Kira and Bashir, they come across a ship that is in distress, and it is this law enforcement officer, I guess, transporting this, the most dangerous criminal in the galaxy to prison, and he set fire to it, and he, in this confrontation, he dies. And okay, well, that's that, I guess. But the security officer, she's pretty convinced that he's alive, and the reason is, apparently this guy can like jump bodies and shit. Like he's died many times, and he keeps coming back as different people. So we kind of take this at face value. Again, the crew of the Deep Space Nine, the little skeptical, they're like, no, don't worry, he's dead. But we know, no, he's probably still alive. So then it all becomes about who it is. Um, and no surprise, it turns out to be the least likely person. It's Bashir. So this is about as close as we get to a really Bashir-centered episode, even though he isn't really himself throughout it. He's possessed by this entity,
Mm-hmm.
and yeah, his whole goal is he needs this compound. I don't know actually know what Viridium is, but it's something unstable and dangerous. But he needs it. Deridium.
Deridium.
Um, yes. I'm not exactly sure what it does, but it's dangerous and he needs it to live. So,
Oh, I'm sure the writers just came up with it on the fly too. I doubt they know what it does.
yeah, okay. Yeah, so he manages to get his hands on it. It's something that he needs to survive, and he takes off with it, and the it boils down to basically they are going to destroy the ship along with Bashir's body in order to stop him.
Yes.
Um, yeah, so I think Dax is the one who goes after him. Dax and the security officer, and yeah, that's basically what it boils down to. Are they gonna save this asshole that nobody likes, um, and to kill this guy, or are they gonna let this bad guy go? But I guess Deep Space Nine needs a doctor, so yeah, in the end they decide to kill the bad guy and save Bashir. This I liked more than the last three episodes. They're the last two episodes that we looked at. Um, it was kind of cool seeing Bashir being a bad guy. It didn't tip its hand too early. Like you did kind of know where it was going, but it kept you interested, and it was a pretty good villain. It um, wasn't one of those Star Trek villains who are like misguided. They really like had, good intentions, but bad execution. The guy was just like an all around bad guy. So I
Mm-hmm.
kind of like seeing that in this episode as well.
Not like that. Yeah. The season 1 and 2 are full of episodes like this that they're not bad episodes that are, like you watch them, they're entertaining enough for the hour. Like you get through them, but there's nothing that really stands out. Like you'll forget about it. Like a lot of these, I look at the titles. I'm like, what? The Passenger? What was that? And then I read the little synopsis. I was like, oh yeah, I remember I watched that one. There's nothing really that stands out with a lot of these episodes, and this one's another one. Like Pete's saying, I didn't even pick up on that. That a lot of these episodes are the single characters getting their little showcase, but it it feels like that was the main point. Let's give each character a showcase, and not actually, I don't know, have character development or move the story
Right.
along, and which I think some of the episodes from the first five that we did that singled out some characters did a little bit better. But this batch here is just like, all right. I mean, it's not a bad episode, but 10 years later, I'm not gonna remember. I'm not gonna remember it like a month later. Um, Now, some things I did like is there's this Odo has this conflict with the new security guy, this guy named Primin, um,
Right.
and who's from Starfleet, the Starfleet security officer, and he got really upset, that he has to
Yeah, he
go.
bitches him out a bit.
Yeah, he goes up to Cisco and is like, I need to know who the security officer is on this station. Is it me or this dude? And Cisco's like, you are Constable. And he doesn't like to be called Constable either. So Odo, a very fickle man in some ways, he's a hard man.
Hmm.
um, yeah, but he gets very emotional when his job is threatened. And I think they did a decent enough job at kind of trying to throw that red herring of who you think is being possessed by this guy
Hmm.
versus who really is. It's better a better reveal. I didn't like the Bashir playing and Sadiq doing the evil Sadiq, with the guy
Yeah.
kind of controlling him. I thought it was kind of cheesy, but I'm reading here that they had to overdub a lot of it. Apparently maybe there were some sound issues or something, so maybe that's why the line delivery is a little awkward. But it was all right. It's kind of a neat ending. A lot of techno babble in the end. But I said here watching these early Alien of the Week, I call them instead of Monster of the Week.
Right.
Alien of the Week episodes can feel a bit tiresome, especially compared to what the show became later on. And I think they're still just trying to find their voice. Um, so it is what it is. By the way, before we move ahead, I forgot I was going to ask you a question about Dax.
Mhm.
What is your verdict? Is Dax responsible for the murder or not? Even if it was a former symbiote host that did it.
Yeah, I would have to say, in a legal sense, yes, because the slug, it retains like all the memories and all the traits of all its previous hosts. So technically, Jadzia is not, but she can't be separated from the slug, and
No.
you got to hold the slug responsible, and that's part of her. And she took it with everything that comes with it. So it's like anything else. If you drink and drive and you kill somebody, maybe you didn't mean to kill somebody, but you made that decision to get drunk and then drive. So you're responsible for the consequences of your decisions, even if they weren't intended.
Yeah, I went back and forth with it, and especially because I don't know if you got to this episode yet, but there's going to be an episode where this guy comes on the station and steals Dax's slug, the Trill.
Okay.
And one of the things that Cisco keeps saying is, "Look, uh, once you steal this slug, you're not going to be you anymore. You're going to be you and Dax and everybody else." And so he kind of uses that in a way to kind of turn the wife against him because he did change. His personality completely changed. So while Cisco was definitely defending this idea that no, they're two separate people, in this next episode, it was more like, no, but you're part, you're part of this lineage now. So I think I'm with you because if you take on the Trill, even if you don't know every detail of what that former host did or the former hosts did, you have to kind of like there's like a contractual agreement there that's like, yeah, but if they committed some crime or if they did something really bad, you have to what do you call it, suffer the consequences. And there's another episode which is actually really good. Was it Blood Oath, where these three Klingons, who had made a pact with Curzon Dax to get revenge on this albino Klingon, come to the station, and Dax goes with them to honor that oath, even
Yeah.
though it was Curzon that did it. So even the show itself kind of goes back and forth with this idea of, is Dax her own person or is she part of the Trill Collective? You could call it like the Borg Collective. It's the Trill Collective. But anyway, nice episode, this passenger, but nothing to write home about. But it's a million
Yeah.
times better than this shit. Oh my god, I was dreading coming to this episode, and it's called "Move Along Home." Story by Michael Pillar, teleplay by Frederick Rappaport and Lisa Rich, and well, it took three people to write this, and Gene Carrigan Fauci, four people really if you count Pillar's story idea. Directed by David Carson. And yeah, Quark cheats the first visitors from the Gamma Quadrant. Uh, Other than it wasn't. Oh well, he wasn't a visitor. I guess he was running away from Iron Tusk, whatever his name was. Quark cheats the first visitors from the Gamma Quadrant in the game of Dabo. So the aliens decide to give Quark a lesson in fair play with a game that places Cisco, Kira, Dax, and Bashir in the middle of a surreal fantasy situation as the players. In order to see the DS9 officers to safety, Quark must play the game through, gambling with lives instead of money. Woo dee doo. Oh my god, Pete. I hate this episode with a passion. Um, and it's basically, again, it's my theme of the night. Pete's theme is it is just getting our characters introduced, and it's not nothing to write home about. And I'm like, this is like the B scripts that just weren't accepted on TNG. They're like, yeah, we got 5 episodes to fill. Let's just reformulate this to work on the space station. Because this feels something right out of Star Trek The Next Generation, but like the bad Star Trek: The Next Generation, which is just they're not in a holodeck this time, because in TNG it's always the
Right.
holodeck malfunctions or something, and they're stuck
Mm-hmm.
with like Sherlock Holmes or with Robin Hood, but it's a sort of holodeck, because they once the game begins, they're transported into that fantasy world and they have to make it through. And oh, the most cringy scene is when there's this little girl that's
The
a
hop,
hop.
skip, and jump scene. Yeah.
Oh my god.
And Dax
Yes.
figures out they it's not just the hopscotch. You got to sing the song too.
Yeah, Toodity Loo. I don't even know. I'm
Yeah.
not even gonna look it up, but it's super annoying. And another one that, it's hard. It's hard to create stakes when you know that your main characters are gonna get through it. So for something
Right.
like this to work, it's not that you you can't put the stake of they might die, because they're not going to die. So it's got to be something unique about the situation that makes you wonder how they're going to get out of here, which makes it
Right.
intriguing when you're doing a weekly TV show like we just did with the X-Files. We knew Mulder and Scully were going to survive every week, but the best episodes are like, but how did they get to survive? How did they get out of this impossible situation? So that there's nothing exciting about this. They're just stuck in a little video game. And um, the parts that are good is Odo, of course. Renee is really good when
Yeah.
him and Quark kind of realize what's happening. And Quark himself, he shows that he's not just about the money, and he cares about Cisco and Kira and Bashir and what's her name, and Dax. Because you see it in his face. He's like, "Oh, I want to get these
Yeah.
people out of here," Because even the guy,
Yeah, I don't think it's so much that he cares about them that much. I think it's just that he doesn't want to be responsible for them dying because then he knows he's fucked.
oh, that's true too. That's true too. But as the series goes on, you realize Quark has a heart. That's Armin Shimmerman who plays
Yeah,
Quark like perfectly. One of the best characters on the show. He doesn't want to show it, but he's got a heart. He's got a heart. And he fucked up. So the characters get to ham it up a little bit, especially Kira. Oh, it's Alamore. Alamore. Oh,
yeah,
God. I actually wrote it down in my notes. I didn't want to have to remember that. And it's the worst of the season so far. Terrible episode. Probably one
okay.
of the worst of the series.
I don't know. I saw on IMDb actually, or actually no, it was on Wikipedia that this was rated like the worst episode of the show. I didn't find it that bad. Like, there's nothing particularly terrible about it. It's just like what you said. It's like low level next generation stuff. Like, put the characters in a ridiculous situation that is ultimately going to add up to nothing, and yeah, have them try and get through it. So I didn't particularly like it, but I didn't totally hate it either. I mean, we've seen this before, kind of forgettable. But yeah, I did like the Quark Odo bits, especially when they, because as far as they're concerned, like, they're playing with these people's lives, and the rules are like about how you move. Like, you can move your pieces the fast way, but that puts them in twice the danger, or you can move them the slow way, and there'll be less risk. And Odo and Quark trying to figure out how to move the pieces in the best way. Their exchanges were actually pretty good.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
No, they're the best part
but
of this episode.
yeah, yeah. And I thought that the crew actually took this all pretty well. Actually, they were like, "Oh, it was just a game." Like, I don't know, man. I think they should have been a little angrier about that. But I guess they got to be diplomatic with first
Well,
contact with a
Cisco
new
raised
race
his
and everything.
voice, but the
Yeah,
guy was just all like, "But it was just a game. It was so wonderful to be here." And so I think for diplomatic reasons, Cisco just was like, "All right, you got this one,"
yeah, okay,
because their lives weren't really in danger.
right.
Um, but oh man, look, I'll give you. Um, Joel Brooks, by the way, plays Fallow, which is the um, the leader of this alien uh, race who says choose the path and move along home a bunch of times in this episode. Um, I'll give it this much credit. It wasn't as painful to watch this time than last time. It seemed like it moved a little bit quicker, but maybe it's because I just had seen it once before. But it was a long
Right.
time ago. So it wasn't as painful to watch as before. But speaking of non-consequential episodes, like maybe this and Q-less are just like why, because at least with Dax you get a little bit of like, she's got the trill in her, and what does that mean? With Bashir, you see that he's an essential part of the crew. I mean, there's not much happening with Bashir at this point in the show, but you get a little bit of stuff that you can sprinkle onto these characters that may be important later on. This episode, there's like nothing. Okay, so it's about the most inconsequential of this first season bunch, but not impossible to watch. And now we get to the Nagus, and I was so thinking about
Inconceivable.
I was thinking about you when I was watching
Yeah.
this. because we just came back, guys, out there listening, from seeing The Godfather on the big screen for the anniversary. Was it 50th anniversary? And there's a
Mhm.
great scene in this one where they spoof The Godfather a little bit. But yes, The Nagus, which premiered on March 20th, 1993. Story by David Livingston, teleplay by Ira Stephen Bear, directed by David Livingston, and great Grand Nagus Zek, played by Wallace Shawn, the leader of Ferengi Commerce, holds a Ferengi meeting to plan business expansion. Should I talk like that? Of Ferengi culture into the Gamma Quadrant. But first, he chooses a successor to fill his shoes when he retires, and that person is Quark. So, what's your Nagus
Well,
review?
yeah. So everyone, like I said, they're getting their own little character development episode. This is Quark's. But one thing that I really like about Deep Space Nine, not up until this point, at this point they still hadn't really figured that out. But as the show progresses, I like the fact that they took certain Ferengi characteristics and as virtues almost.
Mm-hmm.
Um, they in Next Generation, it was like they're bad guys. All they care about is profit. People who only care about profit are bad. Therefore, the Ferengi are bad. And here I felt like they kind of went back to that Next Generation mentality just when Quark was starting to seem like he's kind of a likable character. Like all these Ferengis on the ship, including his own brother, they're like all of a sudden they're back to just being these one-dimensional profit, and profit is portrayed as a greed, and greed is portrayed as bad. So I thought it was kind of a regression of the portrayal of Ferengi in general, but also a bit of a regression for the Ferengis in the show. So yeah, the basic premise here is that the Grand Nagus, he was good. I love Wallace Shawn. He's great. Gets murdered. Well, he's shortly after appointing Quark to be his successor. So
No, I
Quark
think he just
becomes
dies. Was he murdered? I think he just dies. Like he was sitting there and he closed his eyes, and I think they thought he had a heart attack or something. It wasn't murdered though.
okay. But at any rate, yeah, he dies. And so Quark becomes the Grand Nagus. He's the godfather. He's the head of all Ferengi commerce. And we do get some funny comedy bits in there in the middle with him, like, kind of adjusting to his new role, letting it go to his head, completely embracing it, bossing people around and shit. But somebody is trying to kill him. And I thought some of this was part of why I felt like this was a step backward for the portrayal of Ferengi in Star Trek in general, because one of these people is his own brother, Rob,
Hmm.
who's like, first of all, he's a spineless little wiener. It's hard to imagine him as like a murderous type, but I just I don't know the characters that well at this point, but that just it doesn't fly with me. I don't really think he would go so far as to try and kill his own brother. I mean, Quark is portrayed as abusive, very abusive to him,
Very.
but
Yeah.
you get the impression that they still have that family connection where I don't believe Rom would cross that line. We do get some good Ferengi moments in this, though, as we see the development of the relationship between Jake and Nog a bit in this one.
Yes.
Cisco is still a bit down on Jake hanging out with what he considers to be a bad influence. Jake's being kind of secretive, not telling Cisco what he's up to. And in the end, we find out they're such best buddies. Jake is actually teaching Nog how to read. So, yeah, my opinion of this episode isn't that great, but it had some good things. Wallace Shawn, the little subplot with Nog was good. The comedy bits with Nog being, or sorry, Quark being all Ferengi and shit and throwing his weight around. But overall, a giant step backwards for the portrayal of Ferengi in Star Trek.
See, I feel the opposite because the Ferengi first appeared in Star Trek: The Next Generation, and they were just these evil, uh,
Yes.
just these, the last outpost is the episode. Season one, episode five is in 1987, and they were horrible. And it's funny because they were created to be like the new really bad ass bad guys,
But they
they
just
were
weren't threatening enough.
no, at all. They were just laughable. So one of the things that Deep Space Nine managed to do is resuscitate, is like give new life to these characters. But I like that they still don't portray them as what we would consider ethical. They have their own way of doing things. Their culture is built around these rules of acquisition, which, by the way, for the
Yeah, and their virtue, their rules of acquisition are actually like good rules to live by. Like they're not portrayed as like completely evil or self-centered. It's like
wow,
okay,
I don't know.
they have this
Some of them are
philosophy and
bad.
it works.
Some of them are pretty bad. Wait, the sixth rule of acquisition. What is it? What is the sixth rule of acquisition? I didn't write it down, but it definitely. This is the first one that was dropped. It says. Um, oh, I have a site here that gives all the rules of acquisition. But while I'm looking that up, the sixth says never allow family to stand in the way of opportunity.
Well, that's a good rule to live by, though. I do think that because it doesn't necessarily have to be interpreted as cheating your family. It can be interpreted as like your parents holding you back from pursuing your dreams. So that's not a bad rule at all.
A Ferengi without profit is no Ferengi at all. Um, no, I feel you, but they fleshed out the society that's heavily based on commerce. It's campy. I think it's a little over the top, but okay, whatever. That part is what it is. But I like that like they round out the Ferengi a little bit more of how they relate to this, So the Quark's character, how he relates to this, to all the greed. How does his brother relate to all the greed? How Nog relates to Ferengi culture, and I'm glad you mentioned that whole scene at the end because Nog is not allowed to go to school, by his father. He just it's like I don't want him to be in the school anymore. So that's what I appreciated about it, and just building the world and accepting that their world is that, but it's much more multi-dimensional than what TNG offered. Especially when
Yeah.
we get to future episodes, there's an episode where a woman, she pretends to be a man, a Ferengi male, to do business, and she's very good at it, and that makes Quark stop and think. It's like, oh, and given what especially Rom, who becomes a hotshot engineer, and Nog becomes the first Ferengi in Starfleet. Considered in development, the further development of it, I think this is a good starting point, and also because it's not that far removed time wise, I should say, from the TNG Ferengis. I mean, it's far removed as far as how much more complex and how fuller the culture is, but I wouldn't consider it a step back. It's like the Klingons are a warrior culture, and you think to yourself, okay, I mean, how the hell do they even stop fighting long enough to like learn how to fly a ship? But you just
Right.
accept, they're the warrior culture, and it is what it is. And this is the culture that really values greed and money and making profit, but at least it's fleshed out enough where you can have a lot of different interactions within that. I did like the fact that Miles was back. He had taken a little break there. As far as Rom plotting to kill Quark, Yeah, I think he found his moment, man, to step up. And what the funniest part about it is Quark
He
congratulates
commends him. He
him.
commends
He
him.
commends
Yeah,
him. Like, I didn't think you had it in you, because he's
yeah,
so scared of what. So even stuff like that, I think, is great. And of course, Zach coming back in the end, and he was just testing them to see what
yeah,
they would do, and you failed
yeah,
miserably. It's
yeah,
so, it's so great. He's so funny as the Negus, man. And of course, the whole, Quark uh, uh, in the Godfather spoof, like, when have you ever shared your profits with me? when have you
yes.
ever, when have you ever shown me a good option for profit? And now you come to me for help, and now you call me
Yeah,
friend. It's so good. So I like this one. I'm actually a fan of this episode, and I think it does the Ferengi more justice than bad, as far as within the Deep Space Nine episode. And I also, another thing I like about this episode is how Cisco feels about the Ferengi, because you know before this in TNG, well, except for Kirk, Kirk isn't a big fan of the Klingons, as we know. Don't trust him,
yeah,
never will. Um, but we've had so many years of this Star Trek: The Next Generation where everybody just has to respect other cultures, even if they're trying to assimilate you.
yeah,
And here we see that it's still Starfleet. So yes, they're still going to respect the other culture, but it's cool to see Cisco struggling with it. And he's like, he doesn't want his son to be friends with a Ferengi because it's a bad influence. So he's got a little bit of prejudice in him, which I think is cool that they show that he's not a perfect man. Like Picard is portrayed to be so much in TNG. And Miles O'Brien, speaking of him being back on the show after a couple episodes off, how much he hates the Cardassians and the open racism that he has. I think there's a great scene in an episode coming up where his wife has to call him out on it. It's like, that was not a cool thing that you just said. So I love these shades of reality that DS9 has compared to the other iterations of Star Trek. But that's pretty much it. I mean, I like this one. I like this one. So, guys, I thought we were moving fast, but in the end, it was an hour. We're here for an hour. So that's it. This is your hour of Star Trek, guys. And just to review here, we got these 5 episodes. Actually, let's do our skip and watch instead of just reviewing them.
Mhm.
So, what do you think of Q-less? Is that a skip or a watch?
I'm gonna say skip unless you're like a super diehard Q fan. Actually, no, skip anyway. Because if you are a super diehard Q fan, it'll be even more disappointing.
Well, you stole the words from my mouth. Um, I'll change it just a little bit. I was gonna say almost exactly what you said. I was gonna say skip it, but unless you're a Q completist, not
Yeah,
you're not necessarily a fan, but you just really need to see every Q episode. Okay, you're gonna watch this. But if you're a fan of Q, like Pete said, you're probably gonna be disappointed with this one because he does not play a very important role at all. And what about Dax?
yeah, I'd skip that as well.
I gotta agree with you again, man. Not much that's important for the show, and it's pretty forgettable. Go watch Measure of a Man instead. And The Passenger.
I would say watch this one simply because you got to have something in this batch, and I think that's probably my favorite of the batch. It's
Hmm.
forgettable, not a must see by any stretch of the imagination, but I'll say it's my favorite of the 5 episodes we reviewed. So I'll give it like a really half hearted watch.
Yeah, see, I like Dax better than The Passenger, and I gave that a skip, so The Passenger definitely gets a skip from me.
Okay.
And Move Along Home.
Skip.
That's a hard skip for me. Unless you want to see what many consider to be the worst episode of, you're a worst episode completist, then you will want to watch Move Along Home. And then
Right.
we finished up with The Negus.
Yeah, I gotta say skip on that as well.
Oh, I gave it a hard watch. I love this episode. And it's our introduction to the Nagus, who appears many more times on in the series. And there's this one Ferengi episode per year type of thing that happens on
Right.
DS9. So this is the first of the Ferengi episodes, but I really liked it. I liked it a lot. So for me, it's a definite watch. So, folks, that does it. Okay, season one retro review, episodes 6 through 10. I hope if you're watching with us the episodes, that you're having a good time with it, and stick with it, man. DS9 just goes fucking insane in a little bit, But the beginning is a lot of this, sprinkled with some classic stuff in between. Um, but I think we can both agree, Pete, that it's not unwatchable, stuff. It's just
Oh
not
no, not at
memorable
all.
stuff. You know, it'll kill an hour. But
Yep.
it's nothing very memorable. And that's it, folks. We will see you next Wednesday around this same time. Please like and subscribe to the page and live long and prosper.
All right. Cheers.